joining us now is Senator Vincent Fort. And Senator Fort, I remember very well from, this is the first time we've met, but I remember well from when I was working on the Bernie Sanders campaign. He was a Bernie Sanders supporter. He is now running for mayor of Atlanta, and we can attest he has dedicated supporters here at Netroots Nation, which is occurring here in Atlanta, Georgia, and that is where we are recording this from. So first of all, Senator Fort, thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be with you, Richard.
And secondly, you are running for mayor of Atlanta. And before we get into, hopefully, I always like to ask questions people haven't been asked before, but
Sure.
I haven't thought of that one for you yet. So I'll start with one you've been asked a million times. Bear with me, but why are you running for mayor?
It's a question I've been asked a lot, and it's the most critical question, to be honest with you, so I'm glad to answer it. Atlanta is number one, not only in income inequality, but depending on what research you look at, Atlanta's number one or number two in income immobility. That means a child born at our poverty hospital this afternoon, Grady Hospital, a child born at Grady Hospital this afternoon has less chance of any place else in this country of moving from poverty into the middle class. That's not the city that I want, and I don't think it's a city even that most Atlantans want. We want a city where that child or any child can move into the middle class and become a part of the city's mainstream. That's why I'm running. That's what's at stake on November 7th. Whether we're going to have a city hall that works for everybody, the 99%, or whether it's going to continue to be a city hall that works for rich developers and billionaires.
You know, when we talk about inequality in our American cities, whether it's Baltimore, whether it's Atlanta, which is, way up there, I also see along with it, but I want your thoughts on this, what I would call an inequality of perception. That if you're not experiencing the inequality firsthand because of where you live in the city or other factors, the people who support those rich developers and the people who support the politicians who support those rich developers, I feel as if they don't even know that inequality exists. Is that true in Atlanta as well?
Even more so in Atlanta. Atlanta has a reputation for being a quote-unquote black Mecca, a place where you can come and be successful. And, if you're well-educated, got a bunch of degrees, and you have wealthy parents, maybe that's true. But for the too many people, Atlanta is not a Mecca. For too many people, they're being left behind. So that perception is at variance with reality. I was in the airport yesterday, and I saw a woman who worked there. She was pushing a maintenance cart. She had to be in her late 30s, early 40s. And, I'm running for mayor, so I talked to her, of course. And she says she lives in a neighborhood that I'm very familiar with in southeast Atlanta. And I was going to ask her how much money she made. And before I could do that, she told me that she made $8.55 an hour. And that she was working a double shift this week because she couldn't pay her rent the week before. So she had to work a double shift this week, be away from her family, and because she had to pay her rent next week. Anybody who works full-time, who works hard and does her job ought not to have to wear themselves out, work double shifts in order to make ends meet. That's why I'm supporting I supported $15 minimum wage down at City Hall for city workers. But beyond that, we've got to expand that to getting companies, particularly companies that have contracts with the city, to pay their workers a living wage. So if a politician doesn't know about this inequality, their head is in the sand. They ought to talk to their constituents like I did and continue to do.
Well, let me ask you a related question then, because, I always say when I'm talking to people running for office, I always try to bring up, in my case, you're talking about the woman who is working at the airport. I always bring up, let's say, that single mother who is working at a fast food restaurant. Day to day, she doesn't even know what shift she's going to be on and so on.
Right.
Now, election day comes around. And our friends in the Republican Party, to use that language, the Republican Party or someone else has made it incredibly difficult for those people to vote based on where they live, based on other obstacles, based on voter ID or whatever it might be, state to state. But it's very hard, so a woman like that you met in the airport. Now, to get her to vote, she's got to feel strongly enough about the chance that her life will get better and that her community's life will get better. And I'm sorry if I seem like I'm lecturing you here, but I'm setting up a question that she is willing to take the expense and the trouble if she's paid hourly to take 6 hours or whatever it might be for her to vote. And so I guess my question to you then is, how do you reach that woman and the millions or the thousands of people like her in Atlanta so that she has the hope and the belief that things will change enough that she's going to make the effort to get out there and cast that vote?
I appreciate you asking that question, because it's critically important for my campaign to get people out who would not otherwise vote. So it's a tactical issue as well as a moral issue that you've outlined. And I'm the kind of person I advocate voting every opportunity you have, and I really frown on somebody making excuses for not voting. But at the same time, I understand that in order for people to motivate people to vote, you got to give them something to vote for.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's why our campaign can't just be a traditional campaign, rah, rah, vote for me, I'll set you free campaign. It has to be a campaign that's really a movement, a opportunity to go door to door and educate people on where we are in this city, to overcome the perception that this is a city where everybody has a chance to make it, when that's obviously not true. We've got to educate people on what the reality is that Atlanta is today, but also educate them that if they vote and they remain engaged. I mean, one of the great things about the Sanders movement, as opposed to the campaign, the Sanders movement, is that it didn't stop last November 8th. Over the last 8 months, you've seen the Sanders campaign, the Sanders movement stay in place. And that's what we're trying to do, create a movement here in Atlanta and educating people. Because I believe if you give them something to vote for, if you say we're going to create affordable housing, your child, your grandchildren will be able to take advantage of 2-year tuition-free college and those kinds of things, then I think we can get people who would otherwise not have voted to vote. We're going to try to expand the electorate is what I'm saying. So that's, that question is one that has kept me in my campaign advisors up at night.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that, because everybody stresses out over, well, I shouldn't say everybody. I'd say there's a certain element of the Democratic Party that stresses out over, for example, 1% of the electorate who voted for Jill Stein or whatever. They don't stress. My feeling. What about that 50% or more in some cases that doesn't vote at all? So I'm glad to hear that answer. And I guess
or the 75% that don't vote in an Atlanta mayoral election.
I wondered about that. Yeah.
Turnout is, there are about 300,000 voters, about 75,000 people vote. That's 25% turnout.
So, okay, let me pivot for a second. Then you've mentioned a couple different issues. So as we talk about getting those people to vote, turn out and vote, and obviously getting others to vote for you as well, it's about the platform as much as anything else. So what are the key elements of your platform?
Key elements of the platform, I've talked a little bit about gentrification. We're going to invest more money in building affordable housing. The city in the last couple of years have given $850 million to 2 sports teams in towns, the Hawks and the Falcons. In the last year, it is committed to $40 million in affordable housing. So you can see the disparity, almost $1 billion versus $40 million. So we're going to invest more money in affordable housing. 2, on the issue of education, we're proposing we're going to implement 2-year tuition-free college for any child who graduates from Atlanta Public Schools. And then in terms of criminal justice reform, we're talking to any number of advocacy groups, including Black Lives Matter, about decriminalizing marijuana. In Fulton County, the home county for Atlanta, 93% of those arrested for possession of small amounts of marijuana are African Americans, mostly African American males. Marijuana is not a gateway to harder drugs. It's a gateway to mass incarceration.
Right. If you're black.
If you're black. Oh,
right.
yeah.
Yeah. Because if the data here are like the ones I've seen in the past, if your race determines not only whether you get arrested, but whether you get incarcerated once you have been arrested. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And it's even more so in Atlanta, Fulton County. I'm ashamed. I'll be honest with you. I'm ashamed to tell you that the disparity of marijuana arrests, black to white, is greatest here in Fulton County.
Oh, that's
of all places,
and terrible. You know, I mean, so basically, this stuff is so, you know, it's such a bad situation, and yet we know, you know far better than I, that they will throw all those developer dollars and everything else against you to make sure that somebody like you does not become mayor of Atlanta. Is that a fair statement right there?
Yeah, that's the, you know, let me tell you, the Chamber of Commerce came after me about 7 years ago when I was running for re-election to the state senate. They spent an inordinate amount of money to beat me. I won with 68% in Democratic primary when they sent a neoliberal business-oriented candidate after me. They are not happy, from what I tell, that I'm doing so well in this in this election, but that's why I'm very clear. This is not about me. It's about us. It's about the citizens of the city creating a movement. If you know, there's an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go by yourself. If you want to go far, go with others. I'm going far with a great movement. One of the people on your crew just told me how enthusiastic my volunteers were, and I'm very proud of that we have a group of young people and others who are just enthusiastic about changing Atlanta. So it's a great campaign. It's tough. You know, I've got a lot of arrows thrown at me by the establishment here in town. I even had a primary opponent last year when I supported Senator Sanders. I caught a primary opponent. I beat them. But so I am just really enthusiastic about what our movement is doing here in Atlanta, in the hometown of Dr. King, hometown of the civil rights movement.
Absolutely. You got a tall order and a lot on your shoulders. So my last question for you is, you having any fun?
I'm having a lot of fun. I mean, meeting people who understand that you have to make common cause with other people, that you know, there's hope. I mean, when the polling came out, and some of the people who were a little bit concerned about whether a true progressive could do well in Atlanta, when the polls came out, it showed me doing so well. I think it heartened a lot of people. Said, we can do this. We can really win. We can really make Atlanta work for everybody. So I'm doing this just about 24/7, but I'm having a lot of fun, and because there are a lot of people out there who are just so positive and so helpful. So yeah, I'm having fun.
Good. Well, Senator Vincent Fort, candidate for mayor of Atlanta, thanks for all your good work, and thanks for coming on the program.
All right. Thank you.